Having me this evening. It's great to be back. As you've just heard, I was an MBA 2002, and I was in this room, Stream A. I think it's where Stream A were. Anyone Stream A? Good. What I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you very briefly about myself and then the business that I set up and sold a couple of years ago now. I was a medical doctor. I am a medical doctor, but I trained in Birmingham and concentrated when I worked in London in obstetrics and gynecology. And I was delivering babies and never got any sleep, and I had an epiphany moment on the labour ward where I realised I didn't want to deliver babies anymore. I wanted to do something else. So not knowing what to do, I went and signed up to London Business School and did the MBA, and I have to say that absolutely influenced everything that happened afterwards. So if you are feeling like, will your MBA influence what happened afterwards? I hope it will, and I think it can. And I spent a lot of time doing the entrepreneurial electives in my second year. I don't know if they're still doing those. I found those to be really helpful. So I hope you do too. So, no one's told me how to change the slides. Is it that? That? There we go. So I'm going to talk about briefly timelines and background to the business that I set up, the things that were important. Now, it's very easy in retrospect to give you the impression that I knew everything that was going on, had it all planned out, had some great strategy, and this is the kind of summary talk of how we all did it. Of course, the reality is half the time it was a complete mess. We didn't know what we were doing, but we were alert enough to hopefully survive. And so what I'm really going to tell you about is things that were important, even though I didn't realize them at the time. So hopefully you can take some of those learns yourself, and if you're aspiring to be an entrepreneur or are an entrepreneur, use them to your advantage. And then finally, just about 3 points of things I might have done differently at the time, so that again, hopefully those are useful learning points for you. So just the context then. So this is the business, Dr. Thom. I'll tell you in my next slide what the business was itself, but this is the whole context of what we did. So I did my MBA in 2002. I actually set up this website, Dr. Thom's Sex E-Clinic, in 2000. And in great startup tradition, I set it up in my living room. And 11 years later, I sold it to a multinational, which I think was a surprise to me. Certainly, I wouldn't have guessed when I started in my living room in 2000 that was the case. And I'm very proud of that first page. That first site has got a picture of my French exchange, Frédéric, who I met when I was 12 years old. When I set it up, I said, Fred, you're a handsome guy. Have you got any pictures of you lounging around with one of your girlfriends, semi-naked? He said, Thom, I'll send you 50. So he sent me various pictures of him lounging around naked with various girlfriends, and that's the one I chose. That's now his wife, Louise. So they were slightly embarrassed when this appeared on my first page, but anyway, that's where we started. You can see it's not really, the scale shoots along a bit. It took 7 years to go from a hobby in my living room to raising some money, which I think is something that we can easily forget. I didn't wake up one day and go, this business is happening, off we go. It was a series of iterations. In fact, I was doing it through my MBA at the time. So I actually won the business plan competition at London Business School when I was here in 2002, with a lot of help from colleague students who helped me write the business plan. I also won the it was a runner-up, in the European business plan competition for business schools at 2002. And in fact, there was a moment where I thought the best business to be in is not the business itself, it's just to win business plan competitions and take the money that I get from that. But eventually, you run out of steam for that and people see through that. So I had to get on with the business. But it stayed a hobby for quite a long time. And it was only in 2007 when actually one of my brothers said, you know, I kind of like this business. Why don't you join? Why don't we get together, raise some capital, and out we go. And as you'll see when I explain what it is, we actually had a walk-in clinic which opened, which we ended up shutting. We raised some money from angels. 2 years later, we sold 33% of the business. So the angels, in fact, got bought out, and my brother and I got some money out. And then a couple of years later, it was a slightly tense relationship with a big corporate, I have to tell you. And they turned up and said, we're going to buy the whole business. And that was in 2011. I had to stay for 2 years. I became medical director of Lloyds Pharmacy. Lloyds Pharmacy is probably the second biggest pharmacy chain in this country, not very prominent in London. They've got about 1,600 pharmacies around the country. And I was medical director there until 2013 March, when I was allowed to exit. And 3 days after my allowable exit, I exited. So that is the Lloyds Pharmacy online doctor as it became. So what is this online doctor? Because I think it's worth explaining. In summary, and this is the Lloyds Pharmacy site as it is now. In summary, the online doctor was trying to make it as easy as possible for people to look after their health. And the way we were trying to make it as easy as possible was to take away the need to go and see the doctor at all. Because going to see a doctor is often a pain. A lot of services designed for healthcare are not designed around the patient, they're designed around the provider. So the patient has to take time off work, go at the right times, wait for an appointment, all these sorts of things. And we thought, why don't we make it as easy as possible by actually removing the need to go and see a doctor? So we provided healthcare remotely. And it was primarily online, using questionnaires, very simple questionnaires. We also had a bit of telephone consultations. We also had a bit of Skyping. But I have to say most people didn't use that. They used questionnaires. And we had a very defined list of services. That means we weren't an online GP. It was more we had a menu of services. And if you fitted those criteria, then you were probably good for our service. We weren't necessarily dealing with acute medicine. So I've got a cough today, help. It was more, I may be on a medicine, I know what I have to do, just make it as easy as possible for me to get the next bit of medicine that I know I need. And a very good example of that would maybe be the contraceptive pill. We had tens of thousands of women using our service. They knew what pill they were on, they knew what they wanted, they knew what the risks were, they just wanted to have it in their hand as easily as possible. The reason we ended up teaming up with Lloyds is because they have this retail estate. And that proved to be very, very helpful because we ended up becoming an online business that had bricks and mortar collection points, an online business that had seamlessly allowed people to stand in a pharmacy on their iPad, for example, and go, I'm on the contraceptive pill, this is me, da-da-da-da-da-da. I would like to get the pill in about 5 minutes from this pharmacy, could you do it? And it did, and we did it. And that was incredible service when we were competing against wait for an appointment for a week, maybe come after work, actually, sorry, we're full, ring for an appointment, you can't get through for an appointment, all these sorts of things. So we really did what I would say, try and offer a retail experience in healthcare. And that was pretty, I'm afraid, embarrassed to tell you as a doctor, that's generally not how healthcare is delivered. But it turns out a lot of people like that, and that should be no surprise. We also ended up offering our service predominantly privately. So this is in a country where healthcare is free. Patients would pay us to get things they knew they needed generally. But we also ended up doing some NHS work, which I'll talk maybe a bit more about the NHS side of things in a moment. The key to our service, which is buried in one of the bullet points there, industrialized assessments. The trouble with medicine is that the doctor extracts a lot of value and the doctor has capacity very quickly. So if I go and see the doctor, a doctor maybe can see 6, 7, 8 patients an hour. Any more than that, patients start to think they're not getting a good service. The doctor charges maybe a set hourly fee if you're a business, and most of that value goes to the doctor. What we did was to build an IT system that took a lot of that decision-making away from the doctor, to the extent the doctor became what I would describe almost as an air traffic controller. So he just, or she just sat there, the system would say, safe to assess, don't let this patient through, don't let this patient through, prescribe, don't prescribe. You don't even have to look at what the patient has told you, the system has looked at it. And what that meant was, by the end, one doctor sitting in our office could probably manage 700 patients a day. And that's what they were doing. And if you think of the scalability of that, that's extraordinary. So that's fundamentally why Dr. Thom, I think, was a success. So, things that I realized were important even if I didn't know them at the time. I've got a series about 7 points. So the first one, have a clear, tangible problem to solve. When you're starting out with your business, I'm always amazed when I talk to other people how sometimes they cannot articulate a clear, tangible problem to solve. What are they solving that someone's prepared to pay for? Now, you might argue, well, what am I solving that someone's prepared to pay for? So I can do the old classic, hands up, anyone here who has a sexual health problem. Right, you've just demonstrated my problem to solve. People do not want to go and see a doctor about this. They would rather pay for it. They're prepared to do anything for it, frankly, than go and see a doctor about this. And that's what we realized inadvertently, because in obstetrics and gynecology, we do training in sexual health. And I was sitting in my sexual health clinic, patients terribly embarrassed to be there, which I appreciated, having had lots of trouble getting there at all because they couldn't get an appointment. And the problem to solve was summed up in that one thing. Hands up if you have a sexual health problem. No one puts their hands up. But I can tell you there are a lot of liars in this room, just statistically. 10% of you have had chlamydia. You know who you are. I'm not going to point you out because I don't know who you are. So your business has to have a tangible problem to solve. And that was a tangible problem that everybody could get quite quickly. And particularly in healthcare, I'm struck by a number of people who have an idea, a business idea, but the problem to solve is quite intangible, and it's very hard to see how someone will pay for it. So, for example, someone might come and say, I've got this great tool which will risk assess diabetics so they can avoid having amputations in 10 years' time. Now, if you're in the UK, the finance officer of the local healthcare provider, government-funded healthcare provider predominantly, is not worrying about 10 years' time. He's worrying about his check, his finances this month, next month, this year, probably. And I think you can very quickly see that it's a worthy problem to solve, but no one is probably going to pay for it because the people who pay for it won't be around in 10 years in that job, and it doesn't affect them today. And it's got to be more tangible than that. And I see that time and time again. I think very honorable things people are trying to do, but they're going to find it very hard. So please be able to articulate your tangible problem. I'm trying not to make it too healthcare-centric, this talk, but there's not much I can do. That's what I know. If you are thinking of healthcare, can I tell you, gosh, it's a horrible place to try and do disruptive innovation. The UK healthcare market is a disaster if you want to do disruptive innovation. There's lots of innovation going on, but it's the sort of innovation which, if you like, is not disruptive. So, for example, there's lots of IT work going on for clinical systems and all this sort of thing. What they are talking about and what they're doing, I went to a conference on it about 2 weeks ago. Well, we're doing this with IT, this with IT. All they're effectively doing is adding IT to a horse and cart when someone really needs to come along with a car. Because most innovation in healthcare at the moment is still putting people and doctors in the middle of what they're doing. And as I've just said, doctors and people extract most of the value and make it inefficient and expensive. We need to get rid of these people and get systems and maybe IT to manage these people remotely or with artificial intelligence and this sort of thing. It's also a very tough industry to disruptively innovate because the value chain is completely locked up because most healthcare in this country is funded by the government. So you have to get somehow to people who write checks when there are all sorts of lobby groups. There are the GPs, there are the specialists, the hospitals, they're all funded by the government. And if you want to break into that value chain, your disruptive innovation will probably get diluted away. And I have seen that many times as well, where people say, I've got this great product, I'm going to take it to the NHS. It's not one homogeneous body, but it acts in a similar way, and I'm going to get specialists to do this and that. Well, I hope you can, but good luck to you, because I think it'll be about 15 years before you actually have the chance to try something in there, because it's very hard to break into that value chain. And certainly, if any of you have the chance to read it, if you haven't read it already, The Innovator's Prescription is a fantastic book, which I wish I'd read when I was doing my business, about healthcare and the challenges of healthcare innovation, particularly in the US. So the Innovator's Prescription, and it talks just about that and many other things, this locked up value chain where you can't really get in unless you're a big player. You can't get in the NHS also because it's a political football. So 10% of the UK workforce, I think, work in the NHS, second only to in the world, Indian National Railways and the Chinese Red Army. I mean, that's a big voting group. If you're a politician, you don't want to upset that group particularly and say, oh yes, well, let computers get rid of the doctors and, da-da-da-da. It doesn't work very well. And a practical example of that was when we, as Dr. Thom, were doing our remote testing and treatment for sexually transmitted infections. So that was where we'd send a pot to someone, they'd go online for Dr. Thom, say, I think I've got something wrong with me. So some chap would go online and he'd say, I think I've got something wrong with me. We'd send them a pot in the post. The chap pees into a pot, back to our lab. We get the result, process the result, tell the patient and treat them if they need treatment. And you can do a lot with the urine, I can tell you. You can do a lot with saliva as well. So we also did HIV saliva testing, which is another good service. Anyway, we went to the NHS probably the first couple of years that Dr. Thom was up and running. And we went to a PCT, primary care trust, said, we can do all this by post for you. We can do all this by post for you. You don't need your expensive clinics and service to do this. And they said, sounds terribly risky. No. Please no. Now, if we'd stuck with our business plan in the NHS, we would have been finished. We would run out of cash pretty quickly. So we just went away and did it privately. We solved this problem. We knew people had this problem. We just solved it. 5, 6 years later, they started coming back to saying, gosh, you look like you're pretty good at this. Would you mind doing this for us? So we started doing some NHS work for them, and I remember very clearly sitting in one of these meetings and saying to the guy, we'll do this all for you, and you know what, we'll do the treatment as well. We'll just chuck in the treatment for free. We won't even charge you for people who test positive. And the guy said, can't do that. And I said, why can't I do that? He said, because then I have nothing to do. which is a great example of why innovation is difficult in the NHS. There is a vested interest in the status quo. So if you are thinking of healthcare innovation, be alert to understanding your market at that point. I really think this is great. It's great to have an enemy when you're a small business, and that may be surprising to you, but I unintentionally observed that it really galvanizes a team when you have a big enemy. And I think I remember in one of our talks here when I was a student about Apple and IBM and these sorts of things, and how having the big enemy really gelled the team. And I have to tell you that really worked for us. There were a lot of people who were against us. The NHS, parts of the NHS were absolutely against us for the reasons I said. We were disruptive. We were saying, send these people home. You don't need them. The British Medical Association hated us, and which we thought was fantastic because we hated them. And they were not on our Christmas card list, and we were not on theirs. And we were all very happy about that because we could, provoke them, and they would get huff and puff and get terribly cross and talk about patient safety when there was nothing unsafe about what we were doing. And it really helped to gel the team. And that was a cultural thing I think you can't pre-plan necessarily, but it's good where possible to really have an enemy in the system. So to be against the establishment, I found very galvanizing for a small business. And being a people's champion, I think if you look at other businesses, there are lots of examples where the small guy has really kind of got the energy of the consumer and used that to their advantage. And I think we found we had that. We had a lot of very good feedback from patients saying, thank goodness for your service. For the reasons we've said, they weren't going to go to their doctor and say, I've got this problem, doc. They'd much rather have the problem solved by us. And when we did it in a retail way. We really put them at the center of it. Next thing I realized was important, to understand what you're good at. And again, a lot of this comes from business school, it sounds like, but this really is true. Our world as we saw it kind of existed like this. We were doing clinical stuff, and then we had to understand the regulations, and we had to have a good infrastructure to support it, and we had to get our products out there. The only thing maybe missing from there is the pharmacy medicines. We weren't a pharmacy. That's another part of the value chain, I guess. And the business was a real success because we realized what we were good at. And we were good at it for a variety of reasons. My partner in business was my brother, who I have to tell you absolutely nailed this part here, to the extent that the Department of Health were ringing him up and going, what do you think we should do with this sort of thing? He really understood the arbitrage in the regulations. An example being, it's illegal in this country to test for HIV, home test for HIV. But the law was maybe written in a slightly clumsy way, and it just says the doctor has to give the result. A patient can't have an HIV test at home and get the result. So we very quickly, courtesy of my very clever brother Ian, worked out that what we should do is home sampling. So we'll send you the sample, you just send it back to us and we'll give you the result. And we got a stinking letter from the Department of Health saying, you guys are in deep trouble, this is the law. And we said, well, Ian said, firstly, you don't make the law, you interpret it. And secondly, you've misinterpreted it. And they went terribly quiet, and we never heard from them again. So it just shows, if you're prepared to really be forensic about what you're good at, and you can understand why regulations are important. If you're an online doctor in this country, the image is probably, Viagra cowboy, fake medicine, dodgy dealer, no responsibility, lack of accountability, all the things that are bad. And so being on top of the regulations and knowing what you can and cannot do was an important asset, because most people hadn't bothered to do it. We were quite good at the clinical aspects, and that was because we were good, I think, at identifying what services we could safely offer online. And the BMA would go, this is ridiculous, you can't offer a GP online. And we say, that's right, you can't, we're not, idiots. And they'd go quiet again, they'd wait for their next kind of salvo to fire at us. The infrastructure was important. We ended up, and this is a really important point for building IT, I think, we didn't know what we wanted from an IT system when we started. All we knew is we had to have a good front end, because that's what the patient experienced. And in fact, we presented ourselves as a very high-tech doctor online. I mean, this all sounded pretty cool. And from the patient's perspective, it was pretty cool. In the back office, we had pens and papers and rushing around and carrier pigeons, pretty much. It was so basic at the back office. And the reason for that is, firstly, we didn't have the money. But secondly, we were lucky to appreciate, and I think, again, my brother appreciated, there was no point in building this big, complex IT system until we knew what we needed, because we couldn't really tell what was going to happen. And that's a great learn that you should take away. I think, only build the best bits that you really think you need from the customer's perspective, and to hell with the rest. As it turns out, over time, we built a fantastic back infrastructure. As I said, we could 700 patients a day with doctors managing that is a pretty impressive thing. I'll talk a bit sales and marketing distribution maybe more at the end, but in essence, we realized we weren't very good at that. And so our strategy was to get good at the first three bits, to be the kind of intel inside, and then find somebody who could add the distribution. And that's, of course, how we came across Lloyds Pharmacy. I was firing off letters to all sorts of people. I hadn't even thought about pharmacy, but they just came up on the list, and I sent a letter, and they were the ones effectively to bite, because it served their purposes at the time. And this sounds like a really corny kind of management consultant slide, but this is really true, I think. And I did not appreciate this at the time, but I realize it was a good thing now. We decided, our strategy was to be the intel inside, as I've just said, to be really good at those core bits that other people either weren't good, unlikely to be good at or weren't interested in, regulations being an example. But then if we were going to present ourselves as the experts in those areas, we had to make sure what we did to everybody reinforced that. You have to be consistent across your business with what you say you are. And I think there are lots of examples where that does not happen, and there are lots of examples where it does happen. So our strategy was squeaky clean, on top of the regulations, transparent, accountable. And so the way we ran our business and showed our business to customers and patients was that. So we gave the name on the doctor who's looking after them on the website, their registration number. They go right to the regulator if they wanted. We were the first online clinic to ever register with the healthcare regulator in the UK, the Care Quality Commission. We were ISO registered. We spoke to all the regulators. We absolutely went out of our way to say, we are responsible for what we're doing. We're not hiding. This does substitute a visit to your doctor, which is the classic kind of disclaimer on all the dodgy sites. And we are taking full responsibility. In fact, we have insurance to do it. So we absolutely, I think, operationalized our strategy. And I think that is really important. And I had not appreciated that when I was maybe here doing my MBA, that the strategy and then there's operations. You really have to put that all the way through your business. And it's helpful if people are operationalizing your strategy, because it allows for decision-making to go right down to the person on the telephone. So our customer service team knew, we were trying to be the squeaky clean guys. So, if there's any problem, that's the basis of your decision. So we were delegating all sorts of decisions out right to the front, because we knew that people knew if there was any doubt which side of the coin they should choose, which decision they should land on, because as long as it was reinforcing transparency, honesty, and accountability, they could pretty much do what they want. And that was a really helpful cultural thing on top of our strategy. I think this is also another good one. We used to do a lot of navel gazing. Oh my gosh, what are Boots going to do? What's the NHS going to do? Well, what's Lloyd's going to do sometimes? What is going to happen? What are these big boys doing? Well, what a waste of time that was. I mean, if you, as a small company, are not faster and nimbler than all of these people, then you really have got a problem. But the chances are you will be. You absolutely will be. And I can see this now because I had to spend 2 years at Lloyds, who I think are a great business, actually. They're a very good business. But gosh, the difficulty in getting anything done for them is amazing. I mean, our decision-making as a small company is over a coffee, done. If you're going to fail quickly, make mistakes early, make sure your mistakes don't kill you, carry on. Of course, it's not like that in big corporate world. It's committees and decisions, and finance always kill it. And so we wasted a lot of our energy worrying about what the big guys would do. And I think this is maybe specific to the nature of the business we were in. We were doing something innovative, so maybe it would be different if we were trying to copy someone who was big. I guess that's a different scenario. But in the scenario where we're doing something new, stop worrying about the big guys. Get on with what you're good at. Get on with driving customers to your site or whatever you do, and don't worry about them. They will respond so slowly, and I think the only company where we were really impressed that we dealt with their speed of decision making, and they never threatened us, they worked with us, was Asda, so part of Walmart. That really is an impressive organization, huge organization. The decision making really is the guy on the phone. He goes, yeah, no, and that's it. And they are, from my experience, unique, because everybody else we spoke to, Lloyds included, have to go through about 15 levels to get anything signed off. So focus your energy on what you're good at, get on with it, and don't waste your time worrying about the big boys' response. You can maybe co-opt the big boys, which is what we did, I guess, looking for sales and marketing. But we, I think, spent too much time thinking, what will Boots do? What will Boots do? Boots have got other problems. And I think it's also important to have an eye on your exit. And an exit can seem a long way away. You saw my timeline, it was 13 years away, and I didn't have that much of an eye on it when I sat in my living room in 2000 with a picture of Fred and Louise on my website. But, in fact, they were hoping I wouldn't exit, I suspect. Anyway, having an eye on your exit is positioning your company in ways that make it easier for people to come along and think they should buy you. That's one way to look at it. Internally, operationally, it's doing things like getting your accounts fully audited. Now, that seemed like a crazy thing for us to do early on. I mean, that's expensive. We're a tiny company. Why would we want to fully audit our business? I mean, that just makes no sense financially at that time. But it turns out, if someone comes knocking, the best signal you can send that you're a proper business is to go, there you go, there's fully audited accounts last 3 years. That says to them, these people are serious. And the people who have to, finance department again, who have to look at those things, take great comfort in the rigor that you've done that. So having an eye on your exit by having fully audited accounts, I think, is a good idea. And it was not intuitive to me at the time. Again, I credit my brother to that insight. But that paid off because Lloyds, huge company, owned by a German company, 25 billion euro turnover, when they came looking, their accountants wanted comfort. And they wouldn't get that comfort just looking at my brother and I can tell you. They wanted to see numbers. So another way to do it is to structure your business in a way that the lawyers, when they come looking, feel comfortable with. And so I'm sure you can do it online. You can go online and see, and I can provide the information if you want, how you should package up your business. So intellectual property, nice folder of that. Assets, contracts, all these sort of things. Again, signaling to the lawyers that you mean business, you're serious business, and you can do it. And it doesn't cost you much to do that, actually. So documentation, fantastic management accounts. We had a great bookkeeper. That was our best investment, I think, was a great bookkeeper. And another learn from that bookkeeper experience is there is a lot of excellent talent out there wanting to work part-time, for example. We had a lady who was a mum who used to be the financial controller for BNP and Paribas in Singapore, who is now in London part-time as a mum. And she said, I'll do the books. Gosh, we had these fantastic books. I mean, I'd never seen such books. But it was a great signal that we were doing it properly. So again, if you're starting up and looking to kind of, where should you invest your money, having someone who can do the books properly doesn't have to be that expensive, but can be very, very helpful. So, how are we doing for time? So things I would have done differently. There's lots of things I would have done differently. So I've just pulled out 3 things that I think were important. So I told you where we kind of identified in our value chain that we should have been. And I think we really missed out and left a lot of value on the table when we sold our business because we hadn't occupied the sales and marketing distribution thing. We really missed. It was a decision at the time, but it was a decision I regret. We really missed the SEM, social media, SEO, online marketing wave. We explicitly gave it up, mind you. I mean, I said that. We went to people who had a bigger brand, bigger distribution. But if we had been good at that, I think it would have been a more powerful story because we would have had a little more control of our customers. A lot of these customers, I think, in the end, these patients were identifying with Lloyds, not the intel inside. Even though Lloyds needed the intel inside, a lot of the customers were identifying with Lloyds, which had its advantages, to be fair. So when we looked at the amount of customers coming through drtom.com, which is now really, if you go and look at the site, there's almost nothing there, versus the Lloyds Pharmacy site I showed you, much, 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 much more, 10 times more through Lloyds Pharmacy. When they got there, it was probably 5 times better conversion. It was all about the brand. It was all about the trust. If it's Lloyds Pharmacy, it's not a Viagra cowboy. It would just be strange if it was. I can go to the pharmacy and get the real medicine. So there was a good rationale for giving that up. I wish we had been better at the marketing, and our marketing was pretty poor, and we knew that. I mean, I think the best marketing we ever did, I think, was very sporadic. So there's an agony aunt in the UK called Dear Deirdre. I don't know if anyone reads The Sun here. Anyway, she's it's a trashy newspaper, but great agony aunt with lots of kind of juicy stories. Anyway, I wrote to her and said, we got this site, Dr. Tom, that does sexually transmitted disease testing by post and treatment and this sort of thing. And she said, well, that's very kind. If I ever have a letter relevant to that, I'll make sure I mention you. So we wrote a fake letter to Dear Deirdre saying, I think I've got, but I'm too embarrassed to go. And out it went, national newspaper. We got fantastic traffic. It was a great, so there are clever ways to do it. But we really missed the opportunity, I think, to be very good as a brand in our own right. What we became very good at were those things, as I said. And by the end, it was less and less about sexual health and more just about convenience. Patients were going, thanks for sorting out my whatever, or thanks for the contraceptive pill, I'm actually asthmatic. can you help me with my asthma? Or, I'm on high blood pressure tablets. And we had really starting to just open up our system because we had built an infrastructure that worked. But it was certainly a shame, I think, that we didn't have as big a brand ourselves as we would have liked. We also dabbled with international expansion. I think that's something I also regret. So when I left, we were in Ireland, UK, Ireland, and Australia. And that was a long old slog, I have to say. And I think my lesson from that was how exhausting international expansion is, what a drain on resources it can be if you don't do it properly, and you should do it properly. So we were, I think, undercapitalized for our international expansion. We thought, let's just kind of do something on the side. We're an internet business, we can do it from here over to there, this sort of thing. That was really hard work, and it didn't really work, and I'm not even sure it's still working. So if you're thinking of international expansion, I guess my key message, if you get to the stage where you think you should be doing international expansion, is give it some good hard thought. Don't think it's cheap and easy to do. And is there a good rationale for it? Because I think what we ended up doing was diverting a bit of resource away from the UK, which actually would have been spent much better maxing out what we were already good at. We should put all that money into more marketing or done something like that. So I think there's always a temptation, and sometimes for the businessman you want to say it, particularly if you're trying to raise money, because it makes it sound exciting and scalable. But maybe have in the back of your mind that actually, if you were good at something in one country, that money may be better spent maxing out what you've got. And I think the final one is I wish we'd avoided the one-horse race. As I said, Lloyds Pharmacy are a good company, and I like them. But as soon as they bought that 33% stake in 2009, we were in a one-horse race. Was Boots going to buy the other 70%? I don't think so. Was Tesco, was Asda? No, Lloyds had kind of locked it up. And they knew that, and we kind of knew that, but they put a great deal on the table. So in 2009, our angel investors, were celebrating, and so were we, in fact. But what it meant was when things got a bit tricky, Lloyds were in quite a good position to kind of beat us up on value. So we probably left some value on the table. We still got a great deal, but and I think this is a good lesson in general, as soon as you sell a bit of your equity, you absolutely sell 100% of your independence. And one of the reasons why Lloyds did buy us in 2011 is because they found it difficult to work with the Van Every brothers, who were kind of a stroppy duo, when they were a 25 billion euro company who were used to getting their own way. And we would say, well, you can't do that, we'll do this. And they said, well, you can't do that. And we'd say, sorry, you haven't got the equity to say that, so we're doing it. And so there was lots of that sort of tension. And I think in retrospect, if we'd been really smart, and I'm not sure it even could have come about, actually, it would have been better if we'd sold everything to Lloyds in 2009 and said, we're not going to play unless you take the whole thing. It turns out, Lloyds were only investing on the equity. We didn't need to put any money. We didn't need any money. We were throwing off cash. We had a wonderful cash cycle. Patients pay us online in 3 days. We pay our suppliers in 60 days. So we didn't need the money. They just wanted to secure their supply because they had all these pharmacies they wanted to use. So it's a tricky one, that one, because obviously we sold some of our independence when we sold to our angels. I have to say the angels were great. They're very relaxed. They let us get on with stuff. They kept an eye on us from a great distance, but we're happy. As long as we got on with stuff, they were happy. But certainly going into bed with a corporate partner is a tricky one, and I have to say my advice would be not to do it. I'd get money from other people, frankly. And I think that's it. I'm just going to, that bottom comment, I'm swimming the channel, my solo next year for charity. So if this has been helpful and you feel inclined to donate any money, I'd be grateful. Thank you very much.
Can I just start off? I mean, how long was it between the time you started and the time you got the first bit of money in?
The first bit of money in?
Well, 500k.
Oh, 500k, so that's 7 years. Seven years.
Why did it take quite so long? Was it you didn't have the ambition, you weren't ready?
I think it was
didn't want it?
I think it was a mixture. So firstly, I was doing my MBA from 2000 to 2002, and I actually stood here in 2002 and presented to the E100 Club, the Investor 100 Club, and it was all about chlamydia testing at that time, and I just decided I wasn't ready to commit to it. I didn't think it was going to be a big enough business. What changed over the following years was that I ran it as a hobby, and it really was run as a hobby, not quite my living room, but in the study or something. And it just wouldn't stop growing. It just kept growing. People kept using it, and to the point where it was still not turning over very much. So a hobby turning over £25,000 in 2003, well, thought, gosh, well, that's quite, where did that come from, considering I'm not really paying much attention to it? So I think it was over time, realizing that it wouldn't go away became important. And I think for most people, I would guess that, they start their business not as a binary moment. It's not, I'm doing this today and I'm doing this tomorrow. It's a bit of moonlighting, a bit of exploration, feeling your way through. My exploration, feeling my way through, lasted, 5 years.
Okay. Any questions, Ab? Tell me, where did you think I'll do one more, a bit too late, you're next. Where do you think the value was in the business? I mean, you've done loads of stuff. You had some that was valuable and rare and inimitable, whatever it is, VRI. But and lots that wasn't. What do you think what were they buying?
So I think they were buying the sum of some parts which was worth more than the individual parts. So the parts I think they were buying of particular value were a combination of a very smart IT system which we had clinically, with the basis for it was clinically, and a group of doctors managed by myself who were prepared to do stuff in an unusual way, who were not going to act in a mercenary way. And thirdly, they were buying the creative talent of the whole team who were coming up with service after service that they thought they could do remotely and independently. So I'm sure Lloyds went through a process of, should we buy this or should we make it? And going back to my slide about not wasting time, I'm sure the finance department would have killed the project well before they'd got anywhere near making it, and it was just much easier for them to buy it. So again, I think it was a cultural thing. They were buying an IT system and the creativity of the group to come up with these services.
Very
good. Thom, thanks for your talk. You built a business getting people to pay for something that they could get for free. I read an article about a GP surgery in Hanger Lane that has 33,000 polls. Private GP has 33,000 polls on their books because it opens every day. It's open till 11 o'clock at night, so on and so forth. Do you think there's an untapped opportunity to compete against municipal and state providers because people go to a private gym rather than going to using a council gym, so on and so forth, because they're frustrated with having to work within the constraints of the rules of
So I think that's a £1 million question in some sense. I think there ought to be, yes, there absolutely ought to be. I think the challenge is getting someone to accept that, and I think credit to the government in this country trying to introduce things like any qualified provider, which is effectively saying, we don't care who you are, as long as you meet these following standards, you can provide the service and we'll pay you this much, which seems like a good invitation for people to innovate. The problem, I think, that has come about that is as soon as someone tries to do that, particularly in primary care, the GPs in that area might complain, it's not safe, there are issues that get thrown up that you can't do this, blah, blah, blah. They're privatizing the NHS, and it becomes very difficult politically to make that happen. But I think it will happen over time, and I think it should happen over time. And I hope that what often happens is not the case, that the government, someone in government says something, but it never happens on the ground because the bureaucracy and the political interest dilutes it. But your example there suggests there is certainly a niche there of people who are willing to pay. Maybe they're used to paying it, I don't know. But it's certainly offering a service that people need in a slightly innovative way, I would say. Sorry.
Thanks for your talk. Can I just following on from that question and what you were mentioning about AQP?
Yeah.
Do you think the recent changes with the Health and Social Care Act and the development of CCGs and AQP, as you've mentioned, is going to change what you mentioned earlier in your talk about being quite a nasty environment for a healthcare entrepreneur to actually impact change, or are you skeptical?
I think it has absolutely the potential, and a lot of life has to do with timing. Certainly and I'm no political expert, but certainly my impression right now is that for the next 18 months to 2 years, the people who were previously doing it for somebody else, who are now doing it for these commissioning groups, are the same people. They're just rolling over contracts. Nothing will change. And if you're a startup today, you're going to have a 2-year wait, I would guess, before anything happens, which as a startup is a killer time, I would say. So yes, eventually, but not anytime soon, and which is a shame. It's an absolute shame.
You mentioned the regulations were a big problem in
Yeah.
trying to expand, but based on what your experience was in operating, like what would you have wanted to do? Like what would have been like the next frontier for Dr. Thom as your business if there was no regulation in the way?
So I'll give you an example. So in this country, it's illegal to name prescription-only medicines. You can't go onto a website and say, you know, if you're asthmatic and you're on Ventolin, the blue inhaler, buy it here. You can't say that. The regulations prevent that. And yet, for anyone who's on Ventolin, it's a pretty important thing to know that's what you're getting if that's what you're seeking. And so the regulations that were designed to maybe stop people doing stuff in a less educated patient world, but now patients, you know a lot about what they're doing. That sort of thing prevented us just stating the obvious to people of what we had to kind of cage it. It's the blue inhaler, you know the one. You know, which is not really a helpful way to sell something as important as an inhaler. But a general principle about regulations, and I think this is said very nicely in the book, The Innovator's Prescription, which I really would encourage you to read, is, you know, regulations in the healthcare industry have been set up to protect patients. That was the intention, and that's a very worthy intention. What has become the problem is that those regulations are now protecting the providers. And they're using it to protect the providers. The status quo has become concrete and clamped. Barriers to entry are very high, and somehow that has to be broken, and any qualified provider may be an opportunity. There are ways to do it, but the regulation itself, I think, is now being used to keep people out, and that poses a problem in healthcare, and I'm sure there are industries where regulation is similarly a problem.
Thank you. Can you just talk about the early stages and cash flow and how you funded IT regulation? When did you get to the point where you had to say, actually, we need external funds? Were you burning cash for the first 2 or 3 years?
So actually, we were very fortunate. So because it was running as a hobby, and I haven't realized I haven't mentioned the walking clinic, so I'll talk about that. It was running as a hobby, generating cash, and we only ever spent that money to make the front end look nice, and we kept the back end where all it was meant to be high tech, you know, very paper-based and Excel spreadsheets and that sort of thing. And that meant we really didn't need to raise that much money, as it turns out. We were also helped by pharma, so we got some funding from pharma at the early stages, which was great. We were transparent about that. It was very, very little, but it was enough. It was like 10,000 or something, but it made a big difference at the time. What we ended up raising the money for was to open this walk-in clinic, because we thought it'd be nice to have this hybrid if you could go to the doctor and the doctor could manage you online. And that's really why we needed that money. And because our cash cycle was fantastic, as I said, you know, we got our money online in 2 days, and with agreement from the suppliers, we were paying them in 60 days. So that really could fund, and that's why for me an online business is so exciting. That self-funding growth rate is self-financed. So we spent a lot of money opening this clinic in London, in the centre of London. Predominantly, it was kind of a walk-in GP service, and we'd use the GPs when they weren't busy to manage the patients online. So it's kind of sweating the doctor in a nice way. And we realised by 2010 that, you know, it was a good business. It was making money in its own right. It was probably generating 25% of our revenue, and probably occupying about 60% of our management time. And I think that's, again, an important lesson, understanding what you're good at. We realized, actually, what we were pretty good at was this online stuff. And this walk-in clinic, I mean, there are lots of walk-in clinics. That's not novel. It was quite a useful way to sweat this cost, but actually it wasn't that novel. So we actually just turned it off. We just closed the clinic. We didn't sell it. We just closed it. In fact, the waiting room became an extended part of our office. And that was an important thing where we actually turned revenue away to get better at the thing we thought we were different and good at. And from that point, sales really took off, which I think is a useful lesson.
Hi, excuse me. I have a question. So I come also from an e-commerce background, and one of our biggest costs were logistics costs. And it seems from your website that medicines are relatively inexpensive, so the margin on them are not that high. So I'm just wondering about profitability, if you could talk about what your biggest cost structures were and how you were profitable.
So we were very profitable, as it turns out. I think our biggest cost in the end became the IT, and particularly at that back-end IT, because that's where we were spending money replacing the doctor by getting it to do a lot of the stuff. The medicines itself can be very cheap, but the margins are enormous. That's why there's so many pharmacies around. I mean, they make an absolute fortune. It's getting tougher for them, as it turns out. But a lot of these medicines cost pence. Pence. They're generics and these sorts of things. Even the ones that aren't generics, someone like Lloyds with 1,600 pharmacies in the UK, pharmacy chains all around Europe, in countries they can have pharmacy chains, and wholesalers around the world, in Brazil, all sorts of things, they can really have a good discussion with pharma and get a good deal. So they're making a lot of money. So one of the things they were buying from us was the right to carry on dispensing the medicine, because they were making good margin on that, in addition to the profit we were making as doctors. In some sense, we were lucky that we didn't have to spend very much on marketing, because that was not what we chose to spend our money on. As I said, our strategy was, we're not very good at marketing, so let's find someone who is. And so our profit and loss looked very good because we had no sales and marketing. Lloyds were doing all the sales and marketing for us and funding that from the cost of their medicines. And also people walking into pharmacies and buying other things. There's a whole bunch of things they were cross-selling. So for us, we were an IT business, as it turned out, with some doctors on the side.
But it seems that there was some primacy with the customer that you were giving up from the second you decided to go exclusively with Lloyds. I mean, quite separate from the getting money from them and having them as part owner.
Yeah.
There was also the fact that you had decided to make them your point of delivery, and you gave the primacy. You gave away primacy with the customer. Was that a separate?
So I think that's right. So I guess the question is, what would have happened if we hadn't? So how much more would we have had to spend to get the Dr. Tom brand out there, to get it as trusted as Lloyds?
You would have had two.
Well, we did have two, as it turns out, but we realised it just was not cost effective to spend much marketing on our side, particularly when people Googled Dr. Tom and found it was part of Lloyds. Well, I can get it from Lloyds, and and I've heard of Lloyds. So I guess we absolutely gave up, maybe in the customer's mind, who they were dealing with. And the only card we held was that Lloyds couldn't deal with them at all unless they had our intel inside. And that's what they were buying. They were securing that supply when they bought us.
Hiya, I work within the NHS, and one of the problems that we have is with our IT solutions. When you were seeing NHS patients, how did you get your solution to communicate back with the patient's GP record?
So that's a great example of, again, not trying to build something too complicated when we didn't need it. So we said to patients, do you want your GP? We'll write to your GP. We'll just tell your GP, do you want us to? And they go, sure. Or they go, in a lot of cases, forget it. Keep my GP out of it. So we used paper-based system because I think we would have wasted a huge amount of money trying to integrate with the NHS, when in fact the NHS was not particularly interested in integrating with us, and our customers didn't frankly care.
So how did you issue NHS prescriptions? Were you
They
able
weren't.
to
They're
do
all
that?
private. They're all private.
Everything was private?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
The only difference, I should say, was the... well, actually, no, we're all prescriptions are private. The chlamydia testing with the NHS, with the PCT, we never did in the end because they wanted to do it themselves.
We'll take one more or two more questions.
Hi there. We've met before, actually.
We have. Yes, hello.
And I'm sort of NHS, or ex-NHS, which was then transitioned into the council. So I'm a public health consultant in Southwark. And obviously, we've been looking at trying to develop something rather similar, which would interface with the NHS, but actually not be part of it. And we're going through quite a lot of thinking around that at the moment. But I suppose from my question to you really is around which part of your online system was the most profitable? Because actually when I talked to your chief exec a while ago, she said that actually a very large proportion of what you were doing online was actually sort of sexual dysfunction.
Yep, a lot of it.
And is that the most profitable section of your online business, or is it contraception, or is it STI testing, or?
So treatment's definitely more profitable than testing.
Yeah.
And more profitable, I think, because the margins are probably better, but the volumes are much, much higher.
Yeah.
So people are frankly most interested in getting medicines for their problems, or not even their problems, just routine medicines, than they are. There are just more people wanting to do that than there are wanting to test with chlamydia by post.
Sure.
Which is not so counterintuitive. I mean, the chlamydia screening program in this country is targeting 16 to 24-year-olds, I think it is. That's by nature is probably less likely to bring out a credit card and pay a premium. So treatments are definitely where we made most of our money. I think the process we had for our testing was fantastic, and it really worked.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think one more, and there's another. We got one at the back. 1, 2, and then we're done. Yeah.
I'm a medical
Sorry.
doctor as well,
Hello.
and I'm doing the MBA here right now. So one personal question is, you said yourself that you kind of had to deal with a lot of like bad reputation, and everyone was just, like how did you deal with that?
Well, I guess one firstly has to believe in what you're doing. So, again, consistent with the way we wanted to run our business, if we didn't think it passed the smell test, if we didn't think this was a legitimate thing to do, we shouldn't do it. But actually, I think medicine's very odd in the sense that people are like sheep. The doctors are like sheep. That's what everybody else is doing, so I better do it. When you go and find a specialist who's very confident in their subject, and I think a good example is the contraceptive pill. We had on our kind of advisory board the leading contraceptive expert in the UK. He was much more creative because he had the confidence that he knew what he was talking about than, maybe a generalist who didn't. And so he said, you could do this, you could do that. Having said that, and this is a real challenge in any country where they're trying to evolve healthcare. Doctors carry a lot of weight. People listen to their doctors. They listen when doctors say things, and doctors can always say it's not safe. I mean, that's just an easy thing to say, even if it's not true. And so you have to be pretty robust clinically. So we had, good policies and procedures, good data of evidence of what we were doing, what other people had done. And it takes, some strength, if I'm honest. So I've been taken to the regulators 3 times, personally. Every time it's been thrown out, it's been absolutely nonsense, but I have to go through the kind of process. And the basis of the complaints has been something like, I just don't like that, Tom. Which, they're allowed to do that. They're allowed, and they're always doctors. No patients have ever complained. It's always been the doctors. And I guess, I think as my brother said, turkeys don't vote for Christmas. The doctors are never going to say, let's bring in this system that puts us out of a job. So.
One more at the back. Yeah.
Hi, I have my own business which is 7 years old and we haven't yet taken any funding. I was just wondering if you can reveal what percentage the angels took when they put their funding in and how you think...
20%.
Okay, and how you think things might have been different if you hadn't taken funding at that point.
So I can answer that and I'll give you a long answer. I hope it gives you the short answer you need. We raised the money primarily because we decided we wanted to commit to it, and it was difficult for us to commit to it without having a bit of income, and we wanted to open a clinic. So in retrospect, knowing what happened to the clinic, we probably didn't need to raise all that money, and we could have given away, therefore, a lot less. Having said that, I think having money in the bank gave us options, and I don't mean equity options, it gave us choices to try different things and learn a bit more quickly about how we would have gone. And I think that's one of the challenges one has when you're on self-funding is, you haven't got the luxury to put a bit of cash there, bit of cash there, bit of cash there, because the only cash you've got can only go in one direction to usefully test something, often, I think. So we were also lucky because we raised that, I think, just minutes before the banking world exploded, and most of our angels were bankers, as it turns out. And I think we wouldn't have raised the money, frankly, if we'd taken 5 more minutes to raise it. So we were lucky. But you have to be very careful, I think, who you raise that money from. If you don't think you need it, then I would definitely encourage you not to. And congratulations so far for not doing it. I think the only risk comes along is if other people are in your space do, and they can throw more at it and maybe outpace you. That's a judgment call that no one can answer really other than you. But I wouldn't be afraid of it, but you've got to be very careful who you get into bed with, which I would say cautiously in a sexual health business.
Can I just ask one? This is the first time when we've had brothers starting a business up. Any tensions there?
No, I have to say, surprisingly, one reason we decided we ought to sell is we were still getting on, and we were worried that, gosh, this can't go on, surely. Because he said, you used to bully me when I was younger. Anyway, so we were nicely split, I think. I came from a clinical background with some commercial experience. He came from a commercial background with some kind of regulatory experience. He used to be a diplomat, so he was very good at kind of detail of going through very dry contracts and regulations to kind of decipher what had been missaid, as was often the case. So our skills overlapped only in very key areas, and I think if we had, both had the same skills, it might have been harder. I guess it might have been harder. And we also shared the equity. I mean, we just shared it. There was no issue about one or the other.
Okay. Right, that's it. Thanks very much. You're swimming the
English Channel
the
next.
Thames or the Channel.
In fact, there's some MBAs who've already done that. I don't know if they're is it Phil and Jasper and Damien? Is that right? Yeah, I think Damien's done it. I think if I've understood correctly.
Okay. Well, good practice.
Thank you. Yeah.
And good health. Thanks
Thank you very much.
Well done.